Welcome to the program. Like the popular politician he was recently working for, Bruce Hawker polarises people. But the Labor strategist has no time for regrets. He began his career as a lawyer working in Queensland during the Bjelke-Petersen years, an experience that honed his taste for human rights and civil liberties. He says he wouldn't want to be a politician despite urgings from some quarters, but it still disappoints him that a majority of the Labor caucus voted for Julia Gillard in this week's leadership showdown, while most voters prefer Kevin Rudds. Bruce Hawker, welcome to 1+1.
Thank you, Jane.
You began your working life as a lawyer, I believe. What steered you towards politics?
Well, back in the mid-1970s, I was a lawyer working in a private law firm, but I was also quite active in the Labor Party in New South Wales, and I was approached by the then Attorney-General Frank Walker in the Rand government to go and work for him. And of course, having a legal background, that equipped me reasonably well to work in his office.
But what about the passions? What were some of your beliefs at the time that made you feel that working with politicians was a good idea?
Well, I came from Queensland. I grew up in Queensland during the Joe era. That was a tough time when Bjelke-Petersen pretty much ran Queensland the way he wanted to do. And it was a time when civil liberties were trodden on pretty freely. And there was a fair degree of support for a hard line in government. So I think the rule of law became something that I was really attracted to as a way of countering some of the excesses of the Bjelke-Petersen government.
You worked with Frank Walker, as you said. He was from the New South Wales left. What became of your factional allegiances?
Well, I really gave up factional allegiances after I went to work for Bob Carr when he was opposition leader in New South Wales. I was strongly part of the left, I think. You know, I used to attend the so-called steering committee meetings, which were the left faction groups, and signed up for all of the left agenda. But when I went to work for Bob Carr, I felt that it was inappropriate for me as his chief of staff to be involved in factional politics. So I put all that to one side. I thought the role of the chief of staff in an opposition leader's office particularly was to work with everybody.
You worked with Bob Carr for about 14 years, I believe. What motivated your decision to become a strategist and lobbyist?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, you'd sort of seen everything happen. And that was before, sometimes maybe twice, you'd see the same things going on around and around. And politics, in a funny sort of a way, started to have a sameness about it. And I felt after a lengthy period, both with Frank Walker and then with Bob Carr, that it was time to try something else. My great passion has always been political campaigning, but we did the government relations lobbying work really, in many ways, to support the campaigning, because there's still to this day not a lot of money to be made as a political campaigner in this country.
Now, I believe you've given up on the lobbyist element of your work, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
What does being a strategist mean? How exactly do you work, and who pays your bills?
Well, the role of a strategist is really to try to sit above the fray somewhat, you know, to try to look as if you're in a helicopter down on the issues and on the parties and work out a route through a reasonably complex field, and at the end of the day, you know, come out victorious on your side. Now that's it in theory. Of course, in practice you get involved in a lot of tactical issues as well, but a strategist is really there to try to give the overarching messages, the picture that you want to present of you and the other side, and along the way, of course, convince the electorate that you're the better choice.
So in your role as Kevin Rudds' recent strategist, do you think you've fulfilled that role? Because you seem to be pretty front and centre of his campaign.
Yeah, I think I was, and that was a bit different, and it offended a few people inside the party, I've got to say, people who felt that the role of the strategist or the decisions that should be made in the caucus should be discussed by the caucus. I take a somewhat different view about those things. I actually believe that the public has a very real interest in what happens in politics, and the Labor Party caucus should not be a hermetically sealed body removed from what's happening in the public. So it's in the interests of I think, of the political process for people like me to be saying things out there, speaking what I think a lot of people in public are thinking. And of course, in that case, it was, here's a potential leader in Kevin Rudd, who is by far the most popular potential leader being put forward at the moment, more popular than Julia Gillard, more popular than Tony Abbott. Why would we not support him for the leadership of the party?
Were you paid for being Kevin Rudd's strategist?
No, I wasn't. I did it because I thought it was an incredibly important thing for us to do, and so it was done free of charge. And people have said, oh look, this is a great opportunity for him. I've always believed that working with Kevin in this campaign was going to be a career-limiting rather than career-enhancing move. But it was so important from my point of view that we sold him as best as we could that I was prepared to throw my lot in with him.
Your work with Anna Blighs in the Queensland election campaign, are you being paid for that?
Yes. So when I work on those big campaigns like Blighs campaign in Queensland, the party pays me to do that work. And I think it's important that we have professionals like me doing this work on a paid professional basis. It can't always be done by volunteers.
It's been reported that you're taking time off from the Queensland election campaign. Is that because of what's happened with Kevin Rudd?
Well, I decided to join Rudd's campaign when it was clearly escalating in the last week or so, because he really needed some assistance, I believe, to put his best foot forward. That meant I had to, in all conscience, remove myself from Anna's campaign for the duration of that.
So now, you're not hiding under a pillow or anything?
No, I haven't curled up into a fetal position or anything like that. Look, I will return to her campaign in the next day or two. That's the plan. But having said that, it's fair to say that there are some bruised people inside the party. There are people that felt that I shouldn't have come out and said some of the things that I said. I'm of the view, though, that if we don't say those things, if we don't have the public voice being expressed from time to time, then the party will continue to be dislocated from public opinion, and that's a very, very bad place to be.
What about personal bruising? Obviously, some of these attacks must hurt. It's already been said that you may not get an offer to work on the next federal election campaign. How do you take defeats like this in your career?
I think the Labor Party is a very robust creature. The Labor Party is a scarred old warrior that keeps getting hit, keeps coming back. We all have fights internally and we all come back together again.
But
that tends to be the experience. But that's my personal experience as well. We have fights inside the Labor Party and they're very robust, but at the end of the day, people want to win. And if they think that they can get the best strategic advice from me, then I think they'll come back to me. If they think that there are other people who can provide better advice, and there are other very clever people out there, then they'll go to them and I'll be looking elsewhere for work. In a sense, that doesn't bother me too much.
Why not?
Well, because that is the way of life. There's got to be another generation coming through who are better than the ones before, have got new ideas, who are more in touch. And so, if at the end of the day the party says, look, we've had enough of your services and we're going to go for X or Y, then that's what you accept that. That's just the process of getting older in a way. But I hope that I will always have a role to play in the Labor Party. In our record has been very successful. When I was with Hawker Britain and now with Campaigns and Communications, we were involved in about 30 elections on the trot and we won just about every one of them. Every state and territory election campaign that we were involved in between 1998 and 2008, we were on the winning side. Now, we didn't run every one of those campaigns, I'm not saying that, but we were involved in just about every one of them. So we've got a good record.
The winning streak is over, though, or at least it was over after around 2008. You're having tough times at the moment. Do you see this as a long-term trend?
I think it's there for a while. I don't think we're going to see it turning around too quickly. I'm worried about the next election federally. I think we do have somebody in Kevin Rudd who was capable of winning it. All the polls said that, but
But you don't think Gillard can win it?
I think it's going to be much more difficult for Julia to win the election than it was with Kevin. Not saying it can't be done. Look, in Tony Abbott, there is somebody there who we can actually mount a good case against, somebody who's not positive, who's negative and so forth. So there's a lot to be done there, but I think these are tough times for Social Democrats, not here alone, around the world.
Michael Danby, the MP, said this week that if you want to tell elected members of Parliament what to do, meaning you, stand for pre-selection and get yourself elected to a seat. Why have you never wanted to be a member of Parliament or a senator?
Well, I think I had some ambitions earlier in my life, but I realise it's a pretty challenging life for a lot of people, and I felt my skills were better used in other ways. I mean, everyone has got a different skill, a different gift that they can contribute to the party.
So what were the more challenging things that you would have faced if you were a public, I suppose, a more public figure?
Well, I think you really spend your life in a goldfish bowl if you're a high-profile member of Parliament. Not Michael Danby, but if you're a senior member of the party like Julia or Kevin Rudd, you really spend your life there in the public gaze, and I think that's a hard place to be. But as I said earlier, I think it's very important for people who aren't members of Parliament to actually have a real say in what their parliamentarians do. And in the United States, we see primaries where everybody who's got an interest in politics votes for the leader. In the United Kingdom, both the Labor Party and the Conservative Party, rank-and-file members like me, that's what I am at the end of the day, have a vote and a say in the leadership. It happens in France, in Italy. Everywhere you go, we have a much more expansive way of engaging with the electorate, and that means getting party membership to actually vote in the elections. And this is something I'm quite passionate about.
Will you be advising Kevin Rudd to challenge again?
No, I won't. And
categorically?
Categorically. And he won't be challenging again either. He's made it quite clear that this was a very scarifying experience. The party, although it's robust, can't put up with too many of these sorts of events where all we do is basically give ammunition to the other side of politics.
Before the split happened with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard in June 2010, what was your view of Julia Gillard? Did you think she was prime ministerial material? And was it really the events of that night that changed your perception of her, or was it something else?
Oh, I thought she was prime ministerial material. It wasn't so much my perception of her that changed, it was the public perception. And that was the problem. Because of the way in which Kevin Rudd was removed, I think it became very hard for Julia to get ready acceptance in the electorate, because the so-called faceless men removed him in a pretty swift and efficient action. So I think it's always been a struggle for her subsequent to that moment to really gain the legitimacy that she needs. The fact that in the election that followed there was a hung parliament also made it more difficult for her.
So in theory you have nothing against her leadership skills, her ability as a Prime Minister? Yeah,
I think that's largely right. My real concern is that when the public feels that they haven't got the leader that they want, then we've got a real problem in selling any other leader. In 2007, the public believes it elected Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister. Now, regardless of what the parliamentary system throws up, that was the view of the Australian electorate. Then, in 2010, he was removed, and the public was shocked and upset by that and continued to be. And that's one of the reasons why he's mobbed in the street. I liken the swiftness with which he was removed as more like an assassination. People went through a form of grieving as a result of the speed with which he went. 1 minute he's there, then he's gone. And that was hard for people to process psychologically. But then they see him there still, so they think, well, we can have him back and we should have him back. And that's the conundrum that the Labor Party's stuck with right now.
So, in a sense, your actions have been motivated by the desire to, in a sense, mend what took place in June 2010.
Indeed. If we have a fundamental disconnection between the Labor Party and the Labor government and the electorate, then we can't expect them to reward us at the next election. We have to heal that somehow, because it doesn't matter how worthy we are as a political party. If we can't win the popular support of the Australian electorate, then we will go back to the days of John Howard as demonstrated by Tony Abbott and his values.
In June of 2010, I understand you were working in Kevin Rudds' office at the time. Is it a foregone conclusion that the Prime Minister, rather that Julia Gillard at the time, would have seen that specific party polling? Is it possible that she could have decided on the day that she was going to challenge?
I don't know the answer to that. My feeling about Julia, and I was there in the last few days or few weeks actually before the change of leader, was that she was being dragged to that position by people rather reluctantly. That was my sense at the time, and I'm not sure that anything I've seen since then has changed my view about it. I worked after the hung parliament was created with her, by the way, in her office again, to try to convince the independents to come on side, and I worked closely with her to try to make sure that we got a Labor government.
Have you spoken to Julia Gillard since Monday's vote?
No, I haven't.
Was Mark Arbib right to resign?
I think he was, and can I say, notwithstanding everything I've said, I had a lot of respect for Mark and still do. He was a great campaigner, and as someone who makes campaigning their livelihood, I really respected his capacity to campaign. But I think he started to feel the real impact of the events of June 2010. I don't think it ever really was something that he could get away from. And I think that's another reason why it was such a bad move, really. It left so many people inside the party, so many talented people like him, like Kevin Rudd, like Julia Gillard, damaged.
Bruce Hawker, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for speaking with 1+1.
My pleasure.